following quote is a observation that the reporter John Horace made on the apparent lack of protest music in the Glastonbury Festival 2011. This led me to the question, to what extent are young artists and musicians politically motivated, and is this reflected in their musical interests? This summer saw riots across the UK. A recent report has stated that income inequality in the UK is growing faster than any other country. Less people are going to university due to the rise in tuition fees. The number of young people not in education and employment or training is at a record high. The global economy is currently unstable, and the UK is also involved in several conflicts around the world. It would seem that the world is in a state of political instability. Throughout 2011, we have seen protests and protest movements around the world, from the uprisings in the Middle East and Africa to the global Occupy movement. And also recently in the UK, one of the biggest days of strike action in the past 30 years. Weinstein writes, broadly speaking, the protest in protest songs means an opposition to a policy, an action against the people in power that is grounded in a sense of injustice. By this definition, authors have written about a rich past of protest music. But whether or not protest music is purely a reflection of socio-political conditions is something that scholars have disputed, and has been described as crude, unsatisfactory and difficult. It is for these reasons that I have decided to focus my research on the capacity in young artists and musicians to create protest music by studying the extent of their political interests. The global protest movement Occupy is currently employing protest music and forming a collaboration with artists and musicians in many different ways. There is an online list of musicians and artists who are in support of the Occupy movement on occupymusicians.com. There is also occupymusic.org, which is an interactive site where people can upload music relating to the Occupy movement. A CNN article illustrated candidate songs for an Occupy movement anthem. The artists Tom York and Massive Attack have shown their support for the Occupy movement by playing a secret gig. A compilation album has also been created by the Occupy movement to garner support. On this evidence, it would seem that there is a present-day relationship with music and protest. Weinstein also stated that the majority of protest songs in the past 3 decades have been released on indie labels, those without the capital clout to get my attention from radio, TV or mainstream print media. This is more significant than ever if the current monopolistic state of the record industry is considered, and may provide a reason for why young artists are not creating protest movement music. Due to the nature of my research, my strategy will be comprised of the collection of empirical data. This will involve survey data gathering and using a mixed method approach of both quantitative and qualitative data. The advantages of using a mixed method approach is that data accuracy can be improved, and there is also capacity for a more comprehensive gathering of data. A problem with this method, however, is that it creates the capacity for data to contradict each other if managed poorly. A method that I will use to collect survey data is a questionnaire, which will include open and closed questions. This will create the capacity in my research to measure the extent of political motivation in young artists and musicians. Having open-ended questions will also provide space for participants to provide data that I had not factored into the closed questions in the questionnaire. I will also use semi-structured face-to-face interviews to gather data. This may provide room to freely explore an issue as possibly complex as people's political motivation and interests. However, a problem with a qualitative method of data gathering, such as interviews, is that data can sometimes be difficult to analyse if conditions are controlled poorly. External factors can corrupt data. My sampling strategy will consist of non-probability sampling, specifically using purposive sampling. This is due to the fact that it is crucial to my research that my samples consist specifically of musicians and artists. Considering the resources available to me, my sample will be comprised mainly of people also in the second year of popular music course. This is due to the fact that I have already established communication with them and they are a readily available resource. There is also an approximate satisfactory sampling size for the survey. For my interview, I intend to use songwriters within the year group. This will be a smaller number than for the survey, but will be sufficient for collecting qualitative data. I also intend to use triangulation strategy of follow-up interviews with certain participants who provided certain data in the surveys. For example, conducting follow-up interviews on a sample of those that showed a high political and low political motivation respectively in the surveys. Again, a problem with this method is that it may provide data that is contradictory or too vast to be efficiently analysed. When conducting research into people's political interests, it will be important that my own opinions do not influence participants in any way. Ethically, there may be issues with interviewing artists on the subject areas of the music they create. The subject of a songwriter's music may be personal, and it could be considered intrusive and immoral to ask questions in this area. Therefore, it will be important for me to establish an understanding with participants on the subject of my interview. Also, due to the very nature of politics, this research may not produce similar results depending on external factors. For example, an interviewee may feel that they are not very interested in politics when interviewed. However, a week later something may occur within the political climate that the interviewee feels affected by, and then would respond differently to the same questions if posed a week later than originally done. Another example of an external factor that may take effect is geographical location. This brings into question whether my data will be truly representative of all the musicians and artists. This should be factored into my conclusions. I feel that my research may benefit from other research strategies. I have considered an ethnographical approach to this research question. This would consist of studying politically active musicians and artists and researching their relationship with music. However, this could prove to be time-consuming and the data may prove difficult to analyse. This research could be considered to be worth exploring due to the current instability of the political climate. Understanding young people's political interests could be considered important, as young people will at some point exert an influence on the political climate.